Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Jay Tanner, and today I want to talk about Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, the new movie that just came out. Full disclosure, I'm going to be spoiling everything about this movie, so here's your spoiler warning. It takes place in a world where cartoons and humans live side by side, and it follows Chip and Dale after Rescue Rangers was cancelled in the early 90s. Chip has become jaded and sells life insurance and also refuses to make friends, while Dale's still trying to ride out his fame. Eventually they get a call from their old co-star Monterey Jack, who's gotten into some hot water. He has an addiction to cheese, and he ended up taking out loans from a gang in order to pay for it, but he can't pay it back, so now they want to kidnap him. Unfortunately, Monty does get kidnapped, and Chip and Dale get dragged into the situation. They end up uncovering a conspiracy and also rekindle their friendship after being estranged for years. There were aspects of this movie that I enjoyed. Chip had good character development, and it was nice to see him and Dale work things out, and they were overall pretty likable, which is important for the protagonists. My main issue with this film is that absolutely nothing made any sense. There are so many plot holes and inconsistencies in this movie. Things are either poorly established or just not established at all, to the point where internal logic ends up flying out the window. The film is being referred to as a spiritual successor of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and there are a lot of references to that film in this movie, though I'm gonna try not to compare the two here. But Roger Rabbit was far more successful. First of all, using established characters like Chip and Dale or Peter Pan is probably not a good move, because this movie is very anachronistic. It basically states that Chip and Dale start and end with Rescue Rangers, and without the show they become total has-beens, completely ignoring everything else Chip and Dale has been featured in. It shows them meeting in the early 80s, but they were actually created 40 years earlier, and have appeared in multiple animations, had their own comic book runs, and even got a reboot with Chip and Dale Park Life, which is currently airing. But all this is ignored. Meanwhile, they show Baloo, who was also from the Disney Afternoon, and he was able to revitalize his career just because of the 2016 live-action Jungle Book movie. They even reference Kingdom Hearts in this movie, which Chip and Dale appear in, so how come Baloo gets to still have a career? Speaking of that Kingdom Hearts reference, Disney is being accused of tracing it from fan art. This isn't the first time these kinds of accusations have been lobbied at them. They were even accused of stealing art and then slapping it on merchandise to sell at their parks. And that's not the only controversy to come out of this movie. There's also the whole situation with Peter Pan, who serves as the film's main antagonist. First of all, he has the same problem Chip and Dale do. Like them, he's a washed-up actor, which doesn't make any sense. He's also appeared in Kingdom Hearts, there was Jake and the Neverland Pirates, he's constantly showing up at the parks, and so on and so forth. But instead they have him aged to be an out-of-shape middle-aged man. Toon's aging in this universe is very inconsistent. For example, Chip and Dale are shown to have met back in elementary school, and they seem to age normally, but most of the other Toons shown don't seem to age at all. Tiger looks exactly the same as she did in her show, which came out in the 90s, and there's even a scene where Cubby shows up, one of the Lost Boys from Peter Pan, and he also looks exactly the same. He also comments about how Peter Pan aged, which they basically shrug off. Needless to say, this feels very forced, but also pretty gross because this is way too close to what happened to Bobby Driscoll, the original voice actor for Peter Pan, which is arguably one of the darkest stories to come out of Disney. Driscoll was a child star who had a very successful career with Disney. He even won an Oscar at age 12, and when he was 16 they brought him on to model and voice for Peter Pan. However, shortly after the movie was released, they cut his contract short. The story goes that he tried to come into work one day, but they refused to let him on the lot, telling him right then and there that he was terminated. The reason given was that he had acne, and that his voice was getting too low. This led to a very unfortunate downward spiral, where he became depressed and struggled with substance abuse. He did try to have a normal life and continue acting. After his divorce, he moved to New York, where he ended up becoming homeless. He died in an abandoned tenement building, and he was only 31 years old. When the body was discovered, he had no ID on him, so they buried him in a potter's field on New York's Hard Island. He wasn't identified until a year later, when his mother asked Disney to help her find him. To add insult to injury, they don't even know where his body is now, because there was a fire that destroyed the burial records on Hard Island. The whole thing was extremely tragic, and the way it's utilized here is just in poor taste, even if it wasn't intentional, although I find it hard to believe they didn't know what they were doing. Like in reality, Peter Pan has a great time with the Disney movie, only to be kicked to the curb right after it comes out, specifically because he got too old and started getting acne. Like I said, there's major discrepancies when it comes to Toon's aging, but it's also established that Toons can be erased with erasers, like when he threatens to erase Chip's mouth. So him getting acne doesn't actually work aside from just being for plot purposes, because he can just erase the acne. Bobby didn't have that option. Peter not taking the obvious action to fix this issue feels like they are specifically referencing Bobby's story. And even if it isn't, making light of tragic lives of child actors is still really messed up. They could have at least had some meaningful commentary on all of this, but instead they just say that the industry is tough, which is generic enough to where Disney doesn't have to take responsibility for this. But instead they have Peter be this unapologetic monster, literally, with no tact for the story that they're spoofing. Pan is basically a human trafficker for toons. Any toon who owes his gang money, he kidnaps, then he throws them into a machine that does cosmetic surgery, making them look like knockoffs of themselves, and then forces them to act in knockoff movies. So he has access to the kind of technology that can change everything about your appearance, including your art style, but he still looks like this, despite the fact that he can go back to looking the way the way Peter looked in his original movie. Instead he has a Fitbit to try to get back into shape, because that totally makes sense for the story and isn't only being done for the plot. Thanks, Disney. Quick note on this whole trafficking operation. If they're taking high-profile characters that are still working, like Sora, wouldn't the studios start looking for them? What happens if they do cross a studio? But back on topic, the plot just doesn't really work. Then there's the humor. In my opinion, it relied too much on being meta. Most of the jokes were them pointing out how lazy and cliche everything is, and how Hollywood reuses scripts. I like meta humor fine, it's just that in my opinion it overstayed its welcome. For example, they start to realize that there's someone betraying them in their hunt for Pan's operation. Dale speculates it's the police chief, but Chip insists that's too obvious, so it must be the deputy that they've befriended, and he tries to justify his reasoning. The thing is, the whole movie they've been going on and on about how obvious everything is, so really it has to be the police chief, and that ends up being the case. They ended up making their movie predictable. I suppose it was purposeful, but just because they point out how lazy and contrived something is doesn't really change the fact that it's lazy and contrived. It also relied heavily on references and cameos, which is fine on its own, but I felt like it didn't have a lot of substance overall. The last thing I want to talk about is the animation. In this world, toons can get cosmetic surgery to make them look 3D, which is what Dale did, but the characters that are 2D like Chip and Peter Pan aren't actually 2D drawings. They're also 3D, but they're trying to make them look like 2D, except it's pretty noticeable. There's one moment in the movie where they go to a shadier part of town that ends up being the Uncanny Valley, like with Dead-Eyed Polar Express animations and the cats from Cats 2019 show up for a cameo, and they comment on how unnatural and weird everything looks, but I couldn't help but feel like Chip wasn't really one to talk. It would have been nice if we could have seen the whole gang back together, but Gadget, Zipper, and Monterey Jack end up being side characters. Also, for some reason, they shipped Gadget and Zipper together, and they have like 40 kids, which are weird mutant hybrids between a mouse and a fly. I'm not sure who asked for that, because it just seemed kind of weird. It kind of felt like this movie was being off the walls just for the sake of it, along with the script being a mess and the plot not working, while also being predictable. So all of that, along with the problematic villain, just made me really not enjoy this movie. But that's just my opinion. What did you think of this movie? Do you think they were able to capture the spirit of Roger Rabbit? Or do you feel they crossed the line too? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Before I go, I want to give a quick shout out to our members: Stutania, Tyrant Carnivore, Adam K, Shiny Orc Boy, The Rabbit Mancer, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Sandy Martin, Verdant Range, Butcher7 Actual, Dash Hound, JVR, Hussyman42, Nixel, Eric Griffin, Phantom of the Night, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Caleb Nelson, Shrike Z, Bandito Bane, Hunter Rose, Xana X, and Dakari the Professor. Thank you all so much for your support. If you want to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button, and if you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. That helps us out a lot too, and it's free. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.